everyone, it's Cass. Welcome back to my channel, whatcassread. Today, I'm going to bring you a video talking about some of my favorite fantasy tropes. Now, I just did my 4,000 Q&A video, and in that video, I was asked to talk about some of my fantasy tropes, and I think I really only mentioned one, and the more I thought about it, I was like, you like way more tropes than that. So what I wanted to do for you today was bring you a book talking about some of the very specific tropes that I like. Some of them are broad, sure, but some of them are very specific. And then also talk about some of the books that coincide with those tropes, and what made me love about those books was probably because of these tropes. So that goes to say that there might be some slight spoilers for you in this video, just because how can you talk about tropes and talk about the books that coincide with them without being a little bit spoilery? I'm going to try my best to keep things very spoiler free still, but just know that we're going to be talking about the tropes and then we're going to be talking about the books. Okay, so the first one that I wanted to talk about, I have the notes on my phone. This one I absolutely cannot get enough of, and that is when your former antagonist is now an ally, albeit a reluctant ally. So like, this is a well-established antagonist, not just someone that is like introduced to you, you might have some mistrust, and then all of a sudden you're on the same team. No, this is like a well-established antagonist that now has to join forces with our protagonist, and they're both very unwilling to do so, but you both have like this common aim that has brought you together. Do you know what I mean? It's brought you together, but you're still very mistrustful of one another. There's still like that tension that one or the other could, you know, still stab you in the back. It's not always guaranteed that it's going to be a happy ending just because the antagonist is now aligned with our protagonist, all of that good stuff. So that is one of the top tropes that I absolutely adore. And one of the best book series to have this play out is Traitors Blade, written by Sebastian de Castell. We have Falcio Valmond, who is the first cantor of the Greatcoats. He has been in exile, not in exile, but their king has been overthrown, and the ideals that they once fought for are now not the ideals of the kingdom any longer, because now the kingdom has been thrust into the hands of all of these different dukes. The dukes are the one who threw the king out of power, and Falcio has to align himself with one of the dukes to be able to like make a means to an end sort of situation. They find themselves on the same side of epic battle, and will they put their differences aside? Will they trust one another? I said this in my review that it is one of the best main character villain dynamics of all time. This is such an underrated series on BookTube. I just have to also make that plug out there. But anyways, if you're looking for that sort of storyline, I highly, highly recommend Sebastian de Castell, the whole Greatcoat series, book number 1 being Traitors Blade. All right, so the next trope that I'm absolutely in love with is when there's prophecy involved, yes, but I really like it when an author can turn a prophecy on its head. So I think by now, if you are a fantasy reader, there have been many, many stories that you've seen talk of chosen ones. We've got a lot of chosen one tropes out there, but like when there is a prophecy out there that doesn't totally get fulfilled in the way that the main characters and the readers think it will. It's not quite as specific as the antagonist trope, but it's still like when a prophecy can throw me for a loop when we think we're following one storyline and it ends up being something completely different. So I have 3 books to mention that did that so well. The first one is going to be Theft of Swords, the whole Rhaeria Revelations trilogy set of books written by Michael J. Sullivan. We don't really start this book off thinking that it's about a prophecy, but as our characters move along, we realize there is a prophecy out there. A lot of it is because like the church and the religion in this book series has created this kind of prophecy to get the masses on their side, on the side of religion. They try desperately to get this character to fit their prophecy, but the prophecy gets turned on its head. I think a lot of people, and I think myself included, when I talk about this whole series, I talk about the fact that we have Royce and Hadrian, this really great duo, and we talk about the fact that they're these thieves for hire, but I hardly ever talk on the religious aspect of this book, and utilizing the church as the enemy. That's another great trope that I like. I never really touch on that, but if you like prophecies getting turned on their head, I highly recommend the whole Ryeria Revelations. And then another one, Grey Sister, written by Mark Lawrence. This is book number 2 in the whole Book of the Ancestor trilogy, book number 1 being Red Sister. I particularly wanted to talk about Grey Sister just because this is the book that I really feel like we realize that there's a prophecy being turned on its head. So book number 1 really talks about there is this chosen one trope, but we're not quite sure who this chosen one is. And then in this story, it gets revealed that the chosen one might not be a chosen one at all. And I think it takes several books for us to unveil this kind of secret and to unveil the secrets of what exactly this prophesied person is going to be. And it takes until book 2 to really unpack that. And that's probably why book number 2, Grey Sister, is my favorite one. So this was another really good example of prophecy being turned on its head. And we can't really talk about prophecy being turned on its head without bringing up the entire Mistborn trilogy. Again, we start the trilogy off with the Final Empire, and we meet Vin, and we meet Kelsier and this whole gang, and we really think and believe that we know who the hero of ages is going to be. The way that this whole story starts off, our main villain, who we think is the main villain, doesn't last the entire trilogy. So that kind of like shatters your whole world and what this whole prophecy is meant to be. And then it takes us into book 2 and then finally book 3, where do we even figure out who the hero of ages is. So again, this entire trilogy is another great example of prophecy being turned on its head. If you haven't started the Mistborn trilogy, this is your reminder to start on the Mistborn trilogy. Okay, this next trope, I don't know if it's more of a trope or maybe some people will see it as a weakness of the author, but for me, it's definitely a favorite of mine. And that's like super hardy sidekicks, especially when they don't die. Not to say that like the books that I'm about to mention don't include death, because they do, but I'm talking about the fact that you have hardy sidekicks who keep coming back and always have the main characters back. And to be honest, some of these sidekicks in these series are some of my favorite characters in fantasy overall. Okay, so the first one that I have to bring up, let's just keep going with the Mistborn trilogy and I'll talk about the Final Empire. We have the entire gang. They're so hardy, they have their own powers, they're all their own great characters in their own right. I feel like maybe Final Empire was my favorite of the trilogy because we got to spend the most time with all of these sidekicks that are some of my favorite characters. And then the backstory that they have that intersects into Kelsier's life is some really, really, really good stuff. So if you like hardy sidekicks, highly recommend the Final Empire. Of course, another one that we talk about hardy sidekicks, we couldn't not talk about The Lies of Locke Lamora, written by Scott Lynch, the entire Gentleman Bastards sequence. I mean, it's called the Gentleman Bastards for a reason. You have this gang, you have this young ragtag gang of thieves run by Locke Lamora, but you also have Jean Tannen, who is one of the best side characters. Like, sometimes I don't even feel like he's a sidekick. I feel like he is like my own personal guide through the world of Locke Lamora. I'm fangirling over Jean Tannen, but he is, I think, probably the most hardy of sidekicks in my entire stack of books. The Great Coat series, also super hardy sidekicks, but I've already like gone on and on about that one. This next one, okay, when the hero and the villain change mid-series, okay? I love that. When you're reading it one way and then it flips itself on its head and all of a sudden you're reading a completely different book and your view of these characters has completely gone awry. So I might as well talk about another Brandon Sanderson, but this is Warbreaker, written by Brandon Sanderson. This is a standalone novel. I don't want to talk too much about like the main character, like the villain and the protagonist changing places too much, because that is a huge spoiler for this book and it's also a standalone, so that would like take away so much of the book for you. But this one, if you really enjoy that same trope, go ahead, follow along with Warbreaker. The next one that I most recently read, this is The Black Prism, written by Brent Weeks. This has so many twists and turns of who we think the hero is, who we think the villain is. I'm not gonna also get too much into it because that would take away so much of this book for you. It just like completely blew my mind several times. Like, I started reading this book, maybe a third of the way through, I thought I was getting one kind of story, and I was like, well, it's all right. And then we get to like our first of many twists, and that first twist, I was like, oh shit, this is something completely different. And that's what hooked me, and that's what kept me going. This is another really great example of that trope, Black Prism. And this is a series that I'm also like really trying to work my way through, but this is Malice, written by John Gwynne. This is the first book of the Faithful and the Fallen series. This one is like a little bit more obvious than I would say the first two books that I just mentioned when talking about this trope. Like, it's a little bit more obvious who you think that the villain might end up being, just because this whole series really plays heavily into a lot of traditional fantasy tropes, but just gives you like a little sprinkle, gives you a little dash of something different. It's another kind of those tales where Malice starts off one way, and then when that shift happens, it leads the entire trajectory for the rest of our books. And I will say, for all of these villains are not like so obvious because the villain truly believes that they're still the hero. So if you like that, check this one out too. This is another trope that I just absolutely love, and that is the inn. Just the setting of an inn somewhere. There's so many stories that have this setting, but you always know something's gonna go down when the characters find themselves traveling along a road, they find themselves in an inn. Something's about to go down. So some of my favorite inn settings, we have Bloody Rose, written by Nicholas Ames. The story starts within an inn, but that's really what sets the trajectory off. So this just had like a really good vibe within this inn. And then the main character that we meet, she finds herself performing in an inn. So it's not like they have to like be like super bawdy or like a lot of action has to happen in the inns. This is a very like subtle, quiet first look. But just had a really good vibe to it. So Bloody Rose is one of them. I can't talk about inn settings without also bringing up The Name of the Wind, written by Patrick Rothfuss. We have the chronicler, and we have Coat, our storyteller, telling the story of his life, or telling the story of Kavoth, and it takes place in an inn. There's lots of different inn aspects that happen to Kavoth during his storyline. A lot of it has to do with him chasing after a girl, or living in an inn, or really terrible things happening to his life, and he's performing in an inn. But there's also like the main backdrop of the inn. So this is another really good example of that entire setting. There's so many inns. I think the Fellowship of the Ring, that's another really great one, when you have the Inn at the Prancing Pony, where our adventure like truly begins. But I didn't want to talk about that one because I felt that one was like what our inn trope was like based off of. And just another really great inn scene. This is A Court of Mist and Fury, written by Sarah J. Maas. If you've read this book, you know the scene that I'm talking about, and that is also the kind of stuff that I like to see go down in an inn. When it's like, you have to stay overnight, things are getting late, there's only one bed, by the way. That scene. So the other like inn scenarios were like group vibes within the inn. This one is definitely a duo, and I like when that goes down in inns as well. The next trope, we see it a lot, but there's only one book series that I think could top them all, and that is the royal bastard trope. So of course I have to be talking about Assassin's Apprentice, written by Robin Hobb. The entire realm of the Elderlings and the life of Fitzchivalry's Farseer, all of the things that happen to him in his life are because he is the royal bastard. His father abandons his place in the throne, thus like side-shoeing Fitzchivalry's place in line to the throne. Because he's a bastard. We meet several other royal bastards along the way, and I don't want to give out too much information if you haven't started on this. And as his life like moves forward, like I just root for this guy so much. Like I really wish that like we could like literally just acknowledge him for being a member of the Farseer family. We can't. And it breaks my heart every single time. So there's no other book series that I would recommend that does the royal bastard trope better than this one. So if you like that trope, you have to begin The Realm of the Elderlings. You probably thought that was my last one because I love ending on Robin Hobb, but that wasn't my last one. So another trope that I really enjoy is best friends separating and reuniting. Like, best friends that love each other have to separate and go on their own adventures to find their own way, and then come back because they didn't die. I love that. So obviously, I have to talk about J.R.R. Tolkien, The Return of the King, which is nothing but one big like reunion story, and then all of them coming together for our final last stand. Last stands are another great trope that I like. There's just a lot of good stuff in this one, but nothing makes me happier than when our family reunites. But are they reunited for forever? That's also the heartbreak of the best friends reuniting trope is like, we went on our own ways, we found ourselves, we came back, we found one another, but will it remain that way? Who can say? Obviously, The Return of the King is one of the greatest examples of that. And then I did also want to bring up Wind Witch, because I don't think I talk about this series enough, but this is book number 2 of the Witchland series, the first book being Truth Witch, the second book being Wind Witch. Now, we have a little bit of a reunion, a little bit of a best friend reunion in this book, but not entirely. It's another good example of like best friends who are torn apart. They're not even like trying to separate and go on their own adventures because they have to, because it's their destiny to go on this separate adventure, but they're torn apart. They're literally just trying to fight their way back to each other because they're best friends. And that's what I love so much about this trope, is because it's not like a romantic plot line. It's literally these friends just have to make their way back to each other because their world doesn't make sense without each other. This is going to be my final trope that I talk about, but this final trope is the sibling betrayal. I have a very close relationship with my siblings, so I feel like very passionately about this trope, because if the siblings betray one another, that is just like so earth-shattering to me, like the ultimate betrayal. It's not like even like a lover's betrayal, but a sibling betrayal, I feel like trumps lover's betrayal. You know, I feel like they're that. So a really good example of that, again, don't want to get too much into this one, but this is The Black Prism. This has a really great sibling betrayal story. I can talk about the fact that, like, the history of the world is based off of these two brothers, Gavin and Dazengyle. They both find themselves to have the power of the prism, which in this world is like their emperor slash religious figurehead. They are able to wield and draft, that's what their magic is called, draft all of the colors of this spectrum, the light spectrum. The two of them possess those same powers. So in the history of this world, they go to war with one another. So sibling betrayal completely throughout this entire book. Loved it. But I don't want to get too much into that. But another good example of sibling betrayal is going to be The Cruel Prince, written by Holly Black. And this one is going to be like more of that gentle, slow sibling betrayal, but not like in the obvious, like I'm trying to hurt you, whereas like we're going to war with one another. This is more of the like, their sibling always gets the attention, or their sibling is the main focus of the storyline, and then the other sibling is just sick of being on the back burner, wants their own life to take shape, and so they must do something to betray their sibling in order to get what they want. And it's a very subtle betrayal, it's a very quiet betrayal, but it's a betrayal nonetheless. You'll find that within The Cruel Prince. Whew! So if you were watching the 4,000 Q&A, the 4,000 subscriber Q&A video, and you saw my answer to that trope question and you're like, wow, that's it? That wasn't it. I decided to make a whole video talking about some of the tropes that I absolutely adore. Let me know if you agree with my trope choices. Let me know some of your favorite tropes within fantasy. Do you have any good examples of those? Or if you like agreed with these tropes and you had another good example to give to me, because as we know, I really enjoyed these things within these stories. Let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, you can follow me on my social media. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. It's at whatcassread, the same as this channel, so it should be super easy for you to find. And then of course, my Goodreads link is down below, and then the Goodreads link for my book club is also listed down below. Other than that, you know how these videos end. I'll talk to you later. Bye.